We were so happy. I never thought the people who were supposed to love us the most would be the ones to cause us the most pain. They gave us a choice, our love or them. We chose each other. In the shadow of the Union buildings, where tradition and modernity collide, a respected grandmother's heart chose a love that scandalized an entire city. Was it a delusion of an aging mind, or the bravest truth she ever lived? This is the story that made a community choose sides between judgment and grace. The winter sun over Pretoria was a pale, forgiving gold, casting long shadows across the polished cobblestones of Church Street. For 66-year-old Eleanor, her morning walk back from the Hazel Food Market was a cherished ritual, a solitary moment of peace before the silence of her large, empty house descended upon her. The air was crisp, carrying the distant, comforting smell of morning traffic. She was a pillar of her community, a retired history professor from the University of Pretoria, a widow who had worn the loss of her husband, Samuel, for 5 long years with a dignity that commanded respect. But pillars, she was learning, can feel terribly lonely standing all by themselves. Her thoughts were on the emptiness waiting for her, a home her children visited only to discuss her will, not her well-being. When the treacherous edge of an uneven cobblestone caught the heel of her sensible shoe, her ankle twisted with a sickening crunch. The world tilted violently. Her woven bag, filled with fresh produce and a loaf of still-warm bread, flew from her grasp, scattering oranges like fallen suns across the pavement. A gasp escaped her lips, not of pain but of profound, searing humiliation. Is this how it would end? A foolish fall on a public street, a broken hip, a slow decline in a sterile hospital room, while her children argued over power of attorney and who would have to deal with Mom. But the hard, cold ground never met her. Instead, a pair of strong, young arms shot out from beside her, catching her with a firmness that was both startling and incredibly gentle. The world changed instantly. She was held firmly against a solid chest that smelled of fresh laundry, clean sweat, and the faint, hopeful scent of old books and ambition. Flustered and heart-hammering, she turned to look into the face of her savior. Her heart, which had moments before leaped into her throat, now performed a different, more complicated rhythm. It was Daniel Miller. Her grandson, Marcus's best friend since they were boys, building treehouses in her backyard. She had watched him grow from a skinny, brilliant kid with oversized glasses into this broad-shouldered, serious young man of 22, now a final-year medical student at Wits University. "Mrs. Thompson, are you all right? Ma'am, can you stand?" he asked, his voice laced with a concern that felt far deeper than a polite stranger's. His eyes, a warm shade of brown behind stylish frames, scanned her face for any sign of distress, his hands still securely on her arms, holding her weight with effortless strength. "Daniel, goodness, you have saved this old woman from becoming the lead story on the neighborhood WhatsApp group," she said, attempting a light laugh that came out as a shaky breath. She tried to put weight on her right foot, but a sharp electric pain shot through her ankle, forcing a sharp hiss through her teeth. She gasped, her face paling. "Don't try to walk on it, Mrs. Eleanor," he instructed, his tone shifting into one of calm, clinical authority. The doctor he was destined to be already emerging. "It could be a twist. Here, let me." Without a second thought, and in full view of the early morning cafe crowd now sipping their cappuccinos and watching, he scooped her scattered groceries back into her bag with one hand. With the other, he supported her fully, his arm a firm brace around her waist, her weight leaning into his side. He began the slow, careful walk the 3 blocks to her house. The whispers started before they had taken 5 steps. She heard her name and his, tangled together in a web of shocked speculation. "Isn't that Professor Eleanor? That's the Miller boy. What is he? He's carrying her?" She closed her eyes for a brief moment, not from pain, but from a strange sense of relief, leaning into his solid, unwavering strength. It wasn't just the physical support. It was the unhesitating, respectful care. He saw her not as a fragile burden, but as a person who needed and deserved help. And in that moment, as they walked through the dappled sunlight under the oak trees of Arcadia, Eleanor's lonely, silent world cracked open, letting in a single, startling, and warm ray of light. What none of the whispering onlookers knew was that this simple, kind act was the first quiet note of a song that would soon shake their entire city to its core. Daniel insisted on seeing Eleanor all the way to the plush sofa in her tastefully decorated sitting room. He didn't leave immediately like a polite stranger would. Instead, he asked for a basin of cool water, a cloth, and some ice from her freezer. With a clinician's gentle efficiency, he helped her elevate her foot on a stack of cushions, wrapped the ice in a soft towel, and applied it to her rapidly swelling ankle. "You need to keep this elevated for at least a few hours to reduce the swelling, Mrs. Eleanor. I will come back this evening to check on you and make sure you have everything you need," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. It was a statement of fact, not a request. True to his word, he returned at sunset, not empty-handed, but with a small paper bag from the pharmacy containing a packet of anti-inflammatory pain relievers and a box of her favorite tea with vanilla, the one she could never find at her local supermarket. "I remembered you liked this from when Marcus and I would raid your storeroom during our study sessions," he said simply, a shy smile touching his lips. That evening visit became the next and the next. Daniel would come after his lectures. He fixed the stubborn leaky tap in her kitchen that her son Michael had promised to look at for 6 months. He rearranged the heavy art books on her top shelf that she could no longer reach. He stayed for tea, and they talked. She, the retired history professor, found in him a voracious and brilliant intellect. They debated the legacy of Nelson Mandela and Thabo Mbeki, dissected the novels of Nadine Gordimer, and shared their fears and hopes for the future of South Africa. He spoke passionately of his dreams of becoming a cardiothoracic surgeon and returning to contribute to the cardiology unit at Steve Biko Academic Hospital. She listened, her mind, which had felt so dormant and dusty, sparking back to life with the thrill of a real challenging conversation. He, in turn, listened to her stories of teaching through the final years of apartheid, of raising her children almost single-handedly when Samuel's work took him overseas for months, of the quiet, profound ache of her present life, where her family only called to ask for money for the grandchildren's private school fees. "They see this house, my car, my investment portfolio, but they never see me, Daniel," she confessed one evening, her voice soft with a vulnerability she showed no one else. Her hand trembled slightly as she set her teacup down. "They see a finished story, a museum exhibit to be maintained until it can be sold off. You are the only one who still asks me what I think about the world." The gossip, once a faint whisper, became a roaring thunderclap. It slipped under doors and through fiber-optic phone lines. Her daughter, Cynthia, called from her home in Santon, her voice sharp with accusation. "Mother, what is this I'm hearing from Auntie Dale, that Marcus's friend is always at your house? People are talking. It is utterly inappropriate. It's a disgrace." Her son, Michael, arrived unannounced 2 days later, his face a thundercloud of suspicion. He found Daniel on a ladder, diligently cleaning the autumn leaves from her gutters. "What is the meaning of this, boy?" he sneered, looking Daniel up and down with open contempt. "You think because you are at wits, you can come and be doing work for my mother? Trying to write your name into her will? Get down from there and get off this property before I call the police and disgrace you." Eleanor emerged from the house, her eyes blazing with a fire they hadn't seen in years. "Michael, you will not speak to a guest in my house that way. Daniel has shown me more genuine respect and kindness in 1 month than you have in 10 years. Now, you will apologize to him this instant, or you will leave my house." The standoff was electric, a silent, furious battle of wills between a son who believed he was the rightful executor of his mother's life and a mother who was just remembering, with fierce clarity, that she was still the author. Michael left without apologizing, slamming his car door so hard the windows rattled. But the look of pure venom he shot Daniel promised a war. And in a city like Pretoria, wars among the elite are fought not with fists but with lawyers, psychiatrists, and devastating social shame. A week after the confrontation with Michael, a violent, high-veiled thunderstorm swept across Pretoria, its arrival announced by an artillery rumble of thunder, and a sky turned a sinister greenish black. The storm knocked down major power lines, plunging the elegant suburb into an inky, profound blackness. Eleanor was alone in her dark sitting room, the silence feeling heavier and more oppressive than ever, punctuated only by the frantic drumming of hail on the roof. The wind screamed like a chorus of angry spirits around the corners of her house. She fumbled in a drawer for her emergency candles, her hands trembling slightly, not just from the cold. A sudden, frantic pounding at her heavy front door made her jump, her heart seizing with a spike of fear. Her first, terrifying thought was of hijackers, taking advantage of the citywide chaos. "Who was there?" she called out, her voice tighter and higher than she intended, barely audible over the storm. "Mrs. Thompson? It's me, Daniel. I was driving past and saw that the power was out on your whole street. I was worried about you being alone in this." The wave of relief that washed over her was so powerful that it made her knees feel weak. She unbolted the door, her fingers fumbling with the lock, and he stumbled in, soaked from the rain, a powerful flashlight in his hand. "I brought you this," he said, handing her a heavy-duty power bank for her phone. "And some more candles. I know how you hate being stuck in the dark without being able to read." They sat in the flickering, intimate candlelight, the world outside reduced to a primal roar of wind and water. The small circle of light created a fragile, private universe just for them. He told her about the immense pressure from his own family. His father, a stern, proud man who owned a successful construction company, had heard the rumors from his golf buddies and had given him a brutal ultimatum the night before. "Stop visiting the confused old lady, or don't bother coming home again. He says you are using some kind of influence to cloud my mind for money," Daniel said, his voice thick with a pain that had nothing to do with the storm, staring into the flame of the candle. "He says you're making me a laughingstock." "And what do you say, Daniel?" Eleanor asked, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She held her breath, afraid of his answer. He looked at her then, and in the dancing candlelight, his young face seemed ancient, full of a certainty that defied his 22 years. "I say that my father and your children and this entire city are all blind. They look at us and they see a checklist. Age, wealth, status. They see a transaction. They see a scandal. They see witchcraft. They see everything except the one thing that is actually truly here." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow clearer than a shout against the storm's cacophony. "They don't see the friendship. They don't see the intellectual respect. They don't see the love." The word hung in the air between them, vast and terrifying and utterly beautiful. It was a truth they had both been meticulously avoiding for weeks, a line they knew could never be uncrossed. A single tear traced a path through the fine wrinkles on Eleanor's cheek, catching the candlelight. She had not allowed herself to think that word. Love was for the young. Love was her memory of Samuel. Love was not for a woman whose skin was a map of time, whose hair was a crown of silver. She looked at his hand, resting on his knee. Slowly, giving him every opportunity to pull away, to retreat from this face, she reached out and covered it with her own. Her skin was thin, lined with veins and delicate liver spots. His was strong, smooth, and warm. The contrast was shocking, a visual representation of everything the world would say was wrong with them. But when their hands touched, it didn't feel wrong or shocking. It felt like the most natural, the right thing in the world. It felt like coming home after a long, exhausting journey. In that dark, quiet house, as the storm of the century raged outside, a different kind of storm was quietly, irrevocably born within their two hearts. And this one would prove far more destructive than any wind or rain could ever be. The morning after the storm, the sun rose over a washed, clean Pretoria, gleaming off the wet roofs and the glass fronts of the city's high-rises. Inside her home, Eleanor felt similarly cleansed. The resolve that had solidified in the intimate candlelight was now a steady, burning flame in her heart. The fear of scandal had been incinerated, replaced by a profound and simple certainty. She would not hide. She would not be ashamed. She would meet this fight head-on. She invited her 3 children, Michael, the entitled eldest, Cynthia, the dramatic socialite, and Brenda, the anxious peacemaker, to her house for a Sunday lunch, the kind of strained, formal family gathering that had long ceased to be about joy. The meal was a tense drama of normality. They sat around her polished mahogany table, making forced conversation about the storm damage, the volatility of the rand, and the children's latest financial needs. Cynthia complained about the cost of her daughter's riding lessons. Michael lamented the down payment needed for a new luxury sedan. Brenda just picked at her food, sensing the impending storm. Finally, as Cynthia was mid-sentence about the imported leather for her new handbag, Eleanor set her crystal glass of iced tea down with a firm, definitive click that silenced the table. "There is something I need to tell you all," she began, her voice preternaturally calm and clear. She folded her hands on the table, a gesture they all recognized from her most serious university lectures. "I have decided to remarry." Michael choked on his roast chicken. Brenda just stared, her eyes wide pools of confusion and dread. "Remarry? Mother at your age? To who?" Cynthia finally spluttered, a nervous, disbelieving laugh escaping her. "Is it that nice retired judge, Winston Peters? Though I suppose he's a bit old for you now." "It is not Winston Peters," Eleanor interrupted, her tone leaving no room for interruption. She took a slow breath, looking each of her children in the eye. "It is Daniel Miller." The silence that followed was absolute and deafening, broken only by the hum of the sub-zero refrigerator in the kitchen. It was as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the elegant dining room. Michael was the first to find his voice, erupting from his chair so violently that it screeched against the hardwood floor. "Daniel? Marcus's friend? That poor, ambitious boy? Have you lost your entire mind?" Saliva flew from his lips, his face purpling with rage. "Mother, no, the gossip is unbearable, but this is a permanent stain," Cynthia wailed, already acting as if the family's social standing had been doused in gasoline and set alight. "What will people at the club say? That my mother is a cradle snatcher, a shameless old woman. They will laugh at us in Pretoria. We'll become outcasts." Even Brenda, the gentle one, looked horrified, her voice a pleading whisper. "Mom, please, think. Think of your health. Think of your reputation. This boy, what can he possibly want? It's so transparent. He wants your money, your house, your investments. He's bewitched you. Please, let us take you to our pastor and centurion for deliverance." Eleanor listened to their outbursts, their insults, their pleas, her face a mask of calm, patient disappointment. When they had exhausted themselves, she spoke, and her voice, though quiet, carried the weight of a judge's gavel. "For years, you have treated me like an asset. A prized possession to be visited, maintained, and most importantly, to be inherited. You see this house, my car, my stock portfolio. You see a prize to be divided. Daniel," she said his name with a softness that seemed to infuriate them further. "He sees me. He sees the woman who still has thoughts, opinions, and dreams. He asks my opinion on world affairs. He makes me laugh until my sides hurt. He caught me when I was falling, both physically and spiritually, and not one of you was even there to notice I was stumbling." Michael hit the table with his fist, causing the dishes to shake. "Over my dead body. I will not allow it. I will have you declared mentally incompetent by 3 specialists. I will drag that gold-digging boy to the police station for fraud and exploitation. I will ruin him so completely, he'll never practice medicine in this country." Eleanor stood up, drawing herself to her full height, the woman in her rising, powerful and undeniable. "You will do no such thing. My mind has never been more sound. My heart is my own to give. This is not a negotiation. This is not a discussion. This is me informing you of my decision. You can choose to stand with me, your mother, on my wedding day, or you can choose to stand with the gossips and the vultures. But choose very, very carefully, because this decision will define the nature of our relationship or lack thereof for the rest of my life." She turned and walked out of the dining room, her head held high, leaving her 3 children sitting in the wreckage of their own shock, greed, and fury, knowing she had just lit the fuse on a war that would tear her family apart. The wedding day arrived, draped not in the serene joy of a blessed union, but in the electric, morbid tension of an impending public spectacle. Word had spread through Pretoria's social circuits with viral speed. The small, tasteful chapel in the city was packed, but not with well-wishers. It was a circus of curated curiosity. Journalists from the Pretoria News lurked at the back with long-lens cameras. Society matrons from the Waterkloof Country Club filled the pews, their faces masks of thinly veiled judgment. Eleanor, radiant in an elegant cream-colored dress with a modern gold-threaded pattern, her silver hair styled flawlessly, walked slowly down the aisle on the arm of her elderly lawyer, Mr. Abram, the only one from her generation who had not condemned her choice. At the altar stood Daniel, handsome and solemn in a simple, well-tailored black suit, his gaze fixed on her with an adoration and steadiness that for a moment silenced the whispers rippling through the chapel. The pastor, a young man who looked deeply uncomfortable, began the ceremony, his voice trembling slightly under the weight of the hostile atmosphere. He had just asked, "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" when the heavy oak doors of the chapel flew open with a thunderous crash. Silhouetted against the harsh, high-veiled sunlight were her children, Michael, Cynthia, and Brenda, and behind them, Daniel's own parents, their faces twisted in anger and humiliated shame. "I object," Michael's voice boomed, echoing off the vaulted ceilings as he stormed down the aisle, followed by his furious procession. "This is a travesty, a disgusting farce. This boy is a con artist and a predator. My mother is not in her right mind. She is mentally incompetent." The chapel erupted into a cacophony of gasps and excited chatter. Cameras flashed like a strobe light, freezing the horror on everyone's faces. The pastor froze, his Bible trembling in his hands. Daniel's father, a large man with the calloused hands of a builder, pointed a shaking, accusing finger at his son. "You bring this shame on our family. After all the sacrifices we made to put you through school? You choose this deluded old woman over your own blood? She has bought you. She has poisoned your mind." The noise was overwhelming. The accusations, the jeers from the crowd, the blinding media lights. Daniel flinched, his brave composure cracking under the brutal, public disembowelment. He looked like a boy being stripped bare in front of the entire world. Eleanor felt the world begin to spin, the edges of her vision darkening. This was it. This was the humiliating defeat they had all come to witness. She saw the triumphant vindication in her son's eyes. She saw the utter devastation on Daniel's face. But then, a strength she did not know she possessed. A strength born of a lifetime of quiet dignity and a newfound, ferocious love, surged through her. She would not be broken. Not here. Not at the altar of her own happiness. She turned slowly to face the mob that was her family. She gently took the microphone from the stunned pastor's hand. Her voice, when it came out through the chapel's speakers, did not tremble. It did not shake. It was clear, strong, and carried the ringing, authoritative tone of the professor who had once commanded lecture halls of hundreds. "You call me old," she began, her eyes sweeping over her children, then over the rapt, scandalized crowd. "You say I should act my age. You think my age means my heart has stopped beating? That my life is over? That my capacity for love has expired?" She paused, letting the brutal, simple truth of her words hang in the air. "You are my children. You should want my happiness, but you only want my money. You say Daniel is here for what I have, but you are the ones who have always seen me as a thing, an asset to be used. He sees me as a person, to be loved." She turned to Daniel, her gaze softening immeasurably, all the love she felt shining in her eyes for everyone to see. "He is the one who catches me when I fall, and I have been falling for a very, very long time." She handed the microphone back to the ashen-faced pastor. The church was utterly, completely silent. The shame had seismically shifted. It no longer belonged to her. It now sat squarely on the shoulders of her children, heavy and suffocating. She looked at the pastor and said the words that would be printed in newspapers across the country. "Continue, pastor. We are here to become husband and wife." And in that stunned, shamed silence, against all odds, they began to exchange their vows. The wedding did not end the war. It merely changed the battlefield. The headlines the next day were brutal. The Sunday Times social section ran a photo of Daniel's anguished face during the interruption with the caption, "Miller's Folly, heir to construction empire disgraces family." The gossip blogs had a field day, dubbing Eleanor the cougar of Church Street. Their victory at the altar felt hollow as they retreated behind the high walls of Eleanor's home, which now felt less like a sanctuary and more like a fortress under siege. Michael was true to his word. The first salvo came not with a shout, but with a formally worded letter from a top-tier law firm in Sandton. It was a petition to the High Court of South Africa to have Eleanor declared non compos mentis, of unsound mind, and for Michael to be appointed her legal curator, giving him complete control over her person and her multi-million rand estate. The attached supporting documents were a masterpiece of malicious insinuation. Affidavits from concerned neighbors who swore they'd seen her wandering confusedly in her garden. She was gardening. A statement from a nurse Cynthia had procured who claimed Eleanor was forgetful about her vitamins, an outright lie, and a venomous declaration from Michael himself about her baffling and irrational attachment to an obvious opportunist. "They're trying to have me declared a lunatic, Daniel," Eleanor said, her hand trembling as she held the legal papers. The fierce courage from the chapel was now tempered by a cold, clinical fear. This was a fight she could not win with words alone. "They want to lock me away in a home and take everything. They want to destroy you." Daniel took the papers from her, his jaw set in a hard line. The gentle student was gone, replaced by a determined protector. "Then we fight them with the truth," he said, his voice steady. "We fight them with facts." The second front opened on social media. Cynthia, the socialite, launched a vicious campaign on Instagram and Facebook. She didn't name names, but the posts were transparent. "Praying for my family during this difficult time as we try to protect a vulnerable loved one from exploitation." Her well-heeled followers commented with support and outrage, all directed at the invisible, monstrous gold digger. The whispers became shouts online, and the backlash was immediate. Daniel received a terse email from the head of his surgical program at WITS, suggesting he take a leave of absence until his personal situation was resolved to avoid distraction from the program's reputation. It was a thinly veiled threat to his career. The siege tightened. Eggs were thrown at their front gate, which was spray-painted on their perimeter wall. One evening, a brick came crashing through the living room window, wrapped in a note that simply read, "Leave him, old bitch." They sat together on the sofa, surrounded by shattered glass, holding each other in the dark. The world had gone mad. The love they had found had become a target for every form of hatred and small-mindedness the city could muster. "We could leave," Daniel whispered into her hair, his voice thick with exhaustion and pain. "We could go somewhere no one knows us. Cape Town, Durban, just until this blows over." Eleanor pulled back, looking at him. The fear was still there, but it was being burned away by a fresh wave of defiance. She saw the cost this was exacting on him, on his future, and her heart broke for it. But she also knew that running would only validate every lie their enemies were spreading. "No, my love," she said, her voice finding its steel again. "We will not run. This is my home. Our home. If we run, they win. We stay. We fight, and we fight to win." She stood up, brushing the glass from her dress, a general surveying her battlefield. "Call Mr. Abram, and call your father's lawyer, the best one he knows. It's time we stopped playing defense." The siege was on, but inside the walls the resolve had just been reforged, harder and sharper than ever. The High Court in Pretoria was a temple of cold, hard authority. Its ceilings were high, its wooden benches worn smooth by decades of anxious plaintiffs and defendants, and the air smelled of old paper, polish, and lingering anxiety. For Eleanor and Daniel, walking into the courtroom felt like stepping into the lion's den. Michael, Cynthia, and Brenda sat at the opposing table with their expensive, shark-like Santon lawyer, who looked over at them with a smirk of predatory confidence. The public gallery was packed with reporters, nosy onlookers, and a stony-faced Mr. and Mrs. Miller. The judge, a formidable woman named Tracy Beloy, with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, called the court to order. The petition was read aloud, a devastating litany of claims painting Eleanor as a confused, vulnerable old woman being systematically manipulated and stripped of her assets by a cunning young predator. Michael was called to the stand first. Under his lawyer's guidance, he painted a picture of a mother who had become increasingly erratic, forgetful, and bizarrely secretive. He spoke of her irrational attachment to Daniel, implying a sinister, perhaps even chemical influence. "Your Honor, we just want to protect our mother from herself and from this individual," he said, dripping with faux concern. Then, it was Mr. Abrams' turn to cross-examine. The elderly lawyer rose slowly, his movements deliberate. He didn't raise his voice. He simply held up a document. "Mr. Michael, you claim your mother is financially incompetent and vulnerable to exploitation. Is that correct?" "Absolutely," Michael said, puffing out his chest. "Would you then be surprised to learn," Mr. Abrams said, handing a copy to the judge and one to Michael, "that your mother's investment portfolio, which she manages herself, has outperformed the JSE Top 40 Index by 17% over the last fiscal year. This analysis was conducted by an independent firm I hired at her request." Michael's face went slack. The courtroom murmured. Mr. Abram continued. And these bizarre and secretive actions, would they include her monthly donations to the Steve Biko Hospital's cardiac unit? A fund she has anonymously supported for 5 years? Or her meticulous handwritten ledger tracking every single household expense, which shows she has given Mr. Miller a total of 1,000 rand for petrol used to drive her to physiotherapy appointments. He dismantled Michael's testimony piece by piece, revealing the son's profound ignorance of his mother's actual life and his blatant greed. Michael left the stand humiliated. The climax came when Daniel was called. Michael's lawyer went for the jugular, trying to portray him as a lazy, opportunistic freeloader. "Mr. Miller, isn't it true you've dropped out of your medical studies to live off Mrs. Thompson?" "No, sir," Daniel replied, his voice clear and firm. "I am on a approved leave of absence, granted due to undue external pressure from the media surrounding this case. All my coursework is up to date. My professor can verify that. And the car you drive, the clothes you wear, who pays for them? I drive a 2012 Volkswagen Polo. My father bought me when I graduated high school. I paid for the service myself last month with money from my student grant. My clothes are from Mr. Price and Factory. I work 20 hours a week at a bookstore in Menlyn Mall. Here are my pay stubs and bank statements from the last year." He produced a neat folder, handing it to the bailiff. "You will see no large deposits, no transfers from Mrs. Thompson, only my salary and my student grants." Michael's lawyer, flustered, changed tactics. "Then what is your end game, Mr. Miller? Surely you expect a payoff? The house, the inheritance?" Daniel looked from the lawyer to the judge and then directly at Eleanor, his expression softening. "My endgame, Your Honor, is to love my wife, to support her, to make sure the rest of her life is filled with respect and happiness, and to one day, God willing, become a doctor so I can honor the woman who makes me believe I can be a better man. That's the only payoff I want." The courtroom was silent. The arguments about money and competence had just been vaporized by a simple, undeniable truth. Judge Beloy looked from Daniel's honest face to Eleanor's proud one, and then at Michael's shamed expression. She didn't need to hear any more. Judge Beloy's ruling was swift and devastating. She dismissed the petition in its entirety, calling the evidence against Eleanor not only flimsy and circumstantial, but a transparent and malicious attempt to seize the autonomy of a clearly highly competent individual for financial gain. She praised Daniel's transparency and integrity and warned Michael and his siblings that the court would look dimly on any further frivolous actions. It was a total and utter victory. But outside the courtroom, the victory felt different. The legal war was won, but the emotional cost was staggering. The public shaming had taken its toll. Brenda, the peacemaker, was the first to crack. As they walked out of the courthouse, she approached Eleanor, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she choked out. "I was just so scared. Scared of what people would say. Scared of losing you. I let Michael and Cynthia bully me into it." She reached out a hand, but Eleanor, though her eyes were soft with a mother's pain, did not take it. "Fear is an explanation, Brenda, but it is not an excuse," Eleanor said, her voice tired but firm. "You chose them. You have to live with that choice." She turned and walked away with Daniel, leaving her youngest daughter sobbing on the courthouse steps. The family was irrevocably broken. The fallout continued. Cynthia's social campaign backfired spectacularly. Screenshots of her vague booking posts were circulated alongside news articles about the court victory, making her look like a cruel and foolish gossip. Her so-called friends at the country club suddenly became too busy to take her calls. She was socially blacklisted, an outsider in her own shallow world. For Daniel, the victory was bittersweet. His leave of absence from WITS was made permanent. The pressure from donors and the university's fear of negative publicity was too great. The dream he had worked for his entire life was, for now, extinguished. He tried to hide his devastation from Eleanor, but she saw it in the way he stared blankly at his old medical textbooks, in the quiet sighs he thought she didn't hear. The most profound reckoning came from an unexpected source. A week after the trial, a handwritten letter arrived for Daniel. The script was elegant but hesitant. It was from his mother, Grace Miller. "My dearest Daniel, I am writing this because I cannot find the words to say to your face. I have failed you. As your mother, my first and only job was to protect you and believe in you. When this began, all I could see was the scandal. I heard the whispers of our friends and family, and I was ashamed. I was afraid of what this would mean for you, for us. Your father's anger was so loud, and I let it drown out my own heart. Seeing you in that courtroom, hearing you speak with such honesty and strength, I have never been more ashamed of myself. I did not protect you. I condemned you. I did not believe in you. I doubted you. I chose the opinion of strangers over the truth of my own son's character. Your father is not yet ready to admit he was wrong. His pride is a fortress. But I am. You love her. It is a love I do not fully understand, but I can no longer deny that it is real and it is good. You are a better man than any of us gave you credit for. I am so sorry. I can only pray that one day you can find it in your heart to forgive me. With all my love, Mom. Daniel read the letter 3 times, tears welling in his eyes. It wasn't the full reconciliation he longed for, but it was a crack in the dam. It was a single precious seed of hope, planted in the scorched earth of the past few months. He showed the letter to Eleanor, and for the first time in weeks, they cried together, not from pain, but from the fragile healing balm of a single act of grace. The letter from Grace Miller was a turning point. It didn't solve everything, but it lifted a suffocating weight of rejection from Daniel's shoulders. It allowed him to think beyond the siege, beyond the defense. He was sitting with Eleanor in her garden, watching her tend to her prized marigolds, bright and stubborn, just like us, she always said, when the idea struck him. Eleanor, he began, his voice thoughtful. The court proved I don't want your money. Your children think I've stolen your future. The university thinks I'm a distraction. He took her hand, his fingers stained with soil from helping her plant. But they're all wrong. This wasn't about taking. It's always been about building. Building a life. Building a partnership. She looked at him, her eyes curious. What are you thinking, my love? I'm thinking about my dream. It's on hold, but it's not dead. And I'm thinking about your brilliance, your mind for strategy and numbers that humiliated Michael in court. He took a deep breath. We have resources. We have this house, and I have time now. What if we built something new? Together, not for us, but for others. He laid it out for her. The Daniel and Eleanor Miller Foundation, a non-profit organization funded by a portion of her estate. Its mission, to provide full academic scholarships and living stipends for talented, underprivileged students from townships like Mamelodi, who wanted to study medicine but were hamstrung by poverty, just as he nearly had been. Eleanor's eyes lit up with a fire he hadn't seen since their earliest debates. It was a purpose. A legacy. It was the perfect, irrefutable answer to every accusation they had faced. They worked tirelessly for months. Eleanor, with her shrewd financial acumen, structured the foundation's endowment. Daniel, with his first-hand experience, designed the application and selection process. They turned a spare room into an office, filled with application forms, laptops, and a large map of Pretoria. They didn't hire a fancy PR firm. They simply started doing the work. The first scholarship was awarded to a brilliant young woman named Mandy from Mamelodi, who had been accepted to study medicine at WITS but had no means to pay for it. They invited the local community paper to the small award ceremony in their garden. The story they wrote was not about a scandal. It was about hope. It was about second chances. It featured a picture of Mandy, beaming with pride, standing between a radiant Eleanor and a proud Daniel. The article went viral in a way the scandalous wedding photos never did. It was picked up by major news outlets. The narrative began to shift, slowly but surely. The comments online changed from gold digger and shameless to inspiring and what a beautiful legacy. A week after the article ran, a thick, formal envelope arrived from the University of Pretoria's medical faculty. Daniel's hands shook as he opened it, expecting another rejection. It was an invitation. The dean, impressed by the foundation's work and having reviewed Daniel's impeccable academic record, was personally inviting him to reapply to their program, citing the university's commitment to students who demonstrate exceptional character and a commitment to community upliftment. Daniel didn't say a word. He just handed the letter to Eleanor. As she read it, her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears of joy. They held each other, not in defiance against the world, but in celebration of a new one they were building together. The foundation was no longer just a response to their critics. It was the key that was unlocking both of their futures, forging a legacy that would long outlast the memory of any scandal. We still hold out a little bit of hope that one day our families will see past the number and see the love that's so clear to us. But we aren't waiting for that day to live our lives. We're living them now, together. Our love is our defiance. It's our victory. It may have cost us our families, but we found a different kind of family in each other. And that's something no one can ever take away. If your love made you a target, age, race, or faith, tell us how you endured it. Someone scrolling through the comments needs your story. Subscribe to follow our stories. Every message reminds us that kindness is louder than shame. Thank you for listening.